We have love for Africa. There is hope, hope in Africa. We are serving Africa. We are serving Africa. With all passion, we are serving Africa.
Welcome to Serving Africa, where we will be discussing all the challenges facing Africa. And we will also be looking at what is being done on the grounds to solve these issues and to improve the living conditions of the millions living in Africa. With me today to discuss this eminent issue on knowledge for life is Adam Spittles from Humanity First, and he is the program manager for Knowledge for Life, and Akbar Iqbal, who is the project manager for Classroom Transformation. In Africa, poverty is perpetuated from one generation to the other when there is lack of skill, knowledge, and education. Let us look at the magnitude, the scale, the quantum of this crisis of lack of education in Africa.
An education is the foundation for a bright future, yet for millions of Africans, it is out of their reach. Of all the children out of school worldwide, half of them are found in sub-Saharan Africa, with no African country achieving universal primary education. It impacts those who live in the poorest and most rural parts of Africa. Children from these areas are 3 times more likely to be out of school than rich children, with 7 out of 10 young people in rural areas having never attended school. There is also a lack of vocational training in Africa, which only accounts for 6% of total secondary enrollment. This lack of knowledge and skills condemns not only every generation to poverty, but also suffocates the economies of African countries, with a lack of skilled labor and professionals to help them grow.
Welcome, gentlemen, to Serving Africa. Adam Spittles, you are the program manager for Knowledge for Life. What is the scale of the crisis of lack of knowledge or access to proper knowledge in Africa, in your opinion?
So when I visit Africa, I actually find it's the reverse issue that we have in the first world, so UK, America, etc. In that, in the UK, for example, we've got all the facilities in the world, all touch screen. They don't have chalkboards; they're all touch screen, everything like that. But the kids just don't want to go; they're not interested; they don't want to learn. But in Africa, it's a completely reverse, where they're just aching for the knowledge and aching to learn from the teachers, but they've got no resources. So the problem that I've experienced when I visited Africa is a lack of resources being the main problem.
And when you say lack of resources, what are we talking about? Is it the computer, the books?
It's everything. I mean, from what I've experienced, the libraries either don't exist or have very few books. They don't have electricity in a lot of the schools that we saw in Sierra Leone. And obviously there's no computer labs or anything like that in the vast majority. Are
you saying there are no libraries at all in Africa, or they are not, the quantity number of libraries are not?
There are some libraries, but they seem to be quite scarce. So what Humanity First are trying to do is build libraries and stock them.
So Akbar Iqbal, project manager for Classroom Transformation, Humanity First. What is the challenge? What is the crisis in terms of knowledge gap in Africa, in your opinion?
Well, yes, as my colleague Adam was also speaking about, and we saw from the statistics from the introduction clip as well, just the magnitude of the crisis itself. And as Adam was saying, that lack of resources. Now, for example, the first thing, electricity. Now, electricity is a luxury for many schools in Africa, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. The aspect of health and safety, the lack of education about such serious conditions such as malaria, sanitation, poor sanitation in schools, the lack of toilet facilities, and many schools in areas that have boarding schools or have accommodation on site as well. Complete lack of facilities to accommodate that number of students. Lack of food. Many children that come to school in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, are literally surviving on maybe one meal a day, if that. So they're skipping breakfast because unfortunately there is no breakfast. They come to school, and even the lunch that is provided in certain schools mostly is of very basic means, and they go home maybe in the anticipation of having dinner or not. As I was saying as well, that overpopulation of schools, every school has primary levels of 1 to 6, yet there's only 3 classrooms.
So, Adam Spittles, what do you think is the solution, and how is Humanity First, through Knowledge for Life, implementing things that can actually help solve this issue in Africa?
So one of the things that Humanity First are doing are building and running schools. So worldwide we run 22 schools, and in Africa specifically we run 14 schools now. In the Gambia, for example, is a Masura Senior Secondary School, and in Yundum, and it's one of the top 5 schools in the country. We're also, so the Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat is also running about 850 schools in Africa. It's about 400, just over 400 in Ghana, and just over 250 in Sierra Leone. So a combination of Humanity First and the Ahmadiyya community are building schools and running schools to get just as many children into these academic education facilities as possible.
Building schools?
Yeah.
Are there any means of helping students who are needy, who may not be able to afford to attend these schools?
So one of the things that Humanity First has also done in the past is provide scholarships and sponsorships. So if we find an exceptional student that just cannot afford to go to school, Humanity First will sponsor them. And for example, in the Gambia, a friend of mine that I met out there when I visited with my wife during part of our honeymoon, he was one of the sponsored children, and he's now a doctor at one of the local hospitals. So there's some real inspiring stories there. And also, they now work with Humanity First locally in the Gambia.
Now we are here with the models of a classroom to talk about classroom transformation. Gentlemen, Akbar, tell me about what classroom transformation is.
So, Classroom Transformation Project is a recently started project by Humanity First. It was started last March, and it is trying to solve those aspects of whereby schools are lacking in resources and facilities. Now, here we've got a model of a before and after shot of a classroom. Now, before we have completely bare walls, like I was speaking about before, lack of electricity, a blackboard, if that may be. And one of the main aspects of the project itself is redesigning the classroom. So that involves doing the paintwork. Now, even if you painted a room a bright color, like white, for example, it naturally reflects the sunlight. So those schools that are in the middle of remote villages or remote areas, just the aspect of even painting them a bright color brightens up the room naturally. And the other aspect of the project itself is to give these schools posters. And the posters have been designed here in the UK.
Yeah. So we've got a collection of ladies from the community, primary school and secondary school, and basically said one of the things that will really help the classrooms in Africa is to give them posters. So we make them A2, A1? A1 size. Yeah. So big, bright posters. Some of them are, so they're in English and French and Arabic, depending on which country they go to. We've got flags of Africa. We've got digestive systems. So lots of different types of posters. And it just brightens up the room, makes it a bit more interactive. And also they're relevant to the classrooms. So you've got P1 to P6. So some specific posters go in P1, some P3, some P6. So yeah, and we also laminate them so they're a bit more long-lasting.
So are you saying that transforming a classroom like this, bare walls, no paintings, to brighter paintings like that with posters, does have an impact on how students learn and education? Are you saying that?
Very much so. I remember this one letter that I was received from headmistress in Uganda, in a school quite close to the town of Jinja. And this head teacher wrote back to say that after doing this project, those children that had dropped out of school, that had no sort of motivation to come to school, they've started to return.
Because they've seen a brighter school.
Yeah, and it's all about inspiring them as well, because when you come to a classroom that's just bare walls and all you've got is a chalkboard and all you're doing is doing it by rote, so whatever the teacher is writing on the blackboard, to coming in and not only that, the children actually interact with it as well, so they actually paint some of the walls themselves. So we get a local contractor to do the first coat, and then when it comes to the bright colours and doing the images, and like sometimes we do ocean scenes, the children actually do it themselves. So they get a real sense of ownership of it.
How many have you done so far?
So me and Adam were looking at the statistics earlier this morning as well. And so far, since last March, we've helped over 5,500 children through this project alone. We've covered this project in 5 different countries, including Uganda, Ivory Coast, Sierra Leone, Gambia, and other countries in other parts of the world, for example, in Jordan as well. And we have other aspects in the future in other countries.
Is it only painting of the classroom walls, or you do give, I can see some books here on mathematics, English language. Is this all part of the package of the transformation project, the classroom transformation project, or the classroom transformation project is just about the painting and the posters?
No, so the books as well are the third sort of major feature of the project itself. And we have donations of books from schools across the UK and other countries as well. For example, in France, we've had many books in French that have been donated. And these books are then shipped to countries. For example, we had a recently shipment to, for example, in Sierra Leone. And those books actually went to a district library. Now, that district library not only served just one school, actually served 9 different schools that are very close by. And we want to make sure that those books basically are, first of all, well maintained, and that they are kept in good sense of order, so that the children can get as much beneficial or benefit from them.
That brings a question. Africa being a dumping ground for, so to say, irrelevant materials. How does Humanity First ensure that whatever books that is being sent to Africa are relevant for current knowledge and not books which are out of date, that may not serve the purpose? How do you ensure that?
So we have a warehouse in the UK where we basically store the books, and so one of the first things we do is go through them and just make sure that they are the same quality that we would expect in our own schools. The second, so there's a couple of things. One is we try and make sure that so it's like children mathematics are kind of global, you know. So we provide the children's books to the right level. But the other thing is because books are so scarce in a lot of the rural places in Africa, a lot of the children are just desperate to have books at all. So all the books that we provide are educational in one way or another, even if it's not specifically for the curriculum that is there. It's still information. It's still new. So we no longer send, you know, old computers with old, you know, operating systems.
So at least there's some quality control to make sure that it's not as if it's doom and gloom. Africa needs anything, so we're just dumping everything there. That is reassuring and quite good to hear. But do you only work with the primary schools, or you do this classroom transformation with secondary schools as well as the tertiary institutions? What sort of levels are you working in now?
The project itself is open to all levels of education. Wherever we've come across a school that have asked us to do this project or are in association with the charity itself, we've gone out and done it. So the project itself is open to primary, secondary, and of course further education as well. And we've helped institutes like that as well.
That brings to bear the question of how do you do your selection? Humanity First is an organization, a wing of Ahmadiyya Muslim Community. Do you only help Muslims or people who follow the Ahmadiyya community? How do you select who to help?
So how we select it is we reach out to the local teams in the given countries and say, look, this is we've got these funds to do these many schools. Can you take us and show us the most needy? So it doesn't matter whether it's an Ahmadi school or a Muslim school. It's just anyone and everyone.
Anyone and everyone.
Yes.
To wrap it up, what would you say has been one of the hallmarks or the landmarks since this project, the classroom transformation of the Humanity First, began in March?
I think the number of benefits we've seen, like we've mentioned already, the enthusiasm is given to the teachers, the aspect of children coming back to school. This project itself also gives us a chance to assess the condition of schools as well. And it's helped us to then facilitate schools in other means as well, like in extended projects, for example, whereby we've come across a school, we've done this project, but we've also seen that they've lacked in sanitation facilities. We've gone out help in that sense as well. Schools that have not had any sort of scheme for breakfast or any sort of meal, we've gone out and helped them with a breakfast club, starting a breakfast club. And I categorically remember one, especially in Uganda, in a very remote school in Chanjale, whereby we saw this school that had no sense of providing food for the children. And these children were walking, of course, kilometers to get to school anyway. So we ensured that they had a meal in the day for that. And
it's also the price of it as well, because you were saying, it's not, sort of £5 a student for a term. Can you remember the numbers?
It's a very minimal cost to help a school to continue with, for example, with the breakfast club.
Yeah. So with minimal cost, as little as £5 for a term for a student in Africa, through this classroom transformation project embarked on by Humanity First, I can hear and see impact being made.
My name is Mabel Bangura. I'm one of the teachers of Ahmadiyya Muslim Primary School, Freetown. Our school was not painted and was not attractive. Due to that, the children don't even want to sit in the classrooms or even to come to school. Humanity First came and painted our school and decorated the classrooms. The children were so happy, very glad. They even spread the message to their friends to come to their school. And they are so glad to sit in the class. I say thank you to Humanity First for painting our school. Thank you very much.
I understand Humanity First has also been helping a lot in terms of vocational training. Adam Spittles, could you tell us more about it?
Yes, so historically we've had Knowledge for Life as one program and Learn a Skill as another program, but we've now combined them into Knowledge for Life. So basically, the Learn a Skill section of the program is vocational training, so it's things like IT centres, sewing centres, hairdressing salons, those sorts of things. So basically what they're trying to do is, once we've gone through the academic education side of things, provide vocational training. So we've got 28 vocational training centres globally, and 26 of which are in Africa. And they provide things, so the IT centres provide basic Word, Excel, PowerPoint, all those sorts of qualifications that help in offices and banks and things in the main cities. And then we've also got the sewing centres as well. So what we've had in the past is we've had donations of sewing machines. So what we've been able to do is create a classroom, find a teacher, teach sewing, and we've actually been able to give a gift of a sewing machine to the
So which
ladies
countries
as well.
have you so far extended this form of vocational training to in Africa, so to say?
So it's in the Gambia, it's in Sierra Leone, it's in Benin. So we basically deploy them in as many locations as we can.
Well, viewers, we do have an eminent personality joining us via the telephone, Mr. Demba Kande, who is the former head of Knowledge for Life in the Gambia. Welcome to 7 Africa, sir.
Thank you very much for having me.
This is the Knowledge for Life segment of 7 Africa. Sir, what has Humanity First been able to achieve in the Gambia?
Through the Knowledge for Life project, Humanity First has done a lot of activities, made a lot of progress over the past couple of years alone. A lot of projects, including the supporting of educational facilities, with standardization of learning and teaching materials, the fixing of laboratories in remote areas of the Gambia, refurbishment of libraries and classrooms, as Adam and the other colleague were talking about earlier on. We've also done a lot of work around scholarship and sponsorship programs for needy students, particularly. A lot of success stories around that. We have thousands of people have benefited from that. In addition to that, our pioneer project in terms of education in the Gambia is the Masroor Senior Secondary School located at Yundum. It's a young school established in 2005, but in less than 10 years, Masroor Senior Secondary School has established itself as one of the best senior secondary schools in the Gambia, providing education at a very reasonable and affordable prices to average Gambian.
So, sir, would you say that all these projects have had a positive impact on the educational landscape in the Gambia? And if yes, to what extent?
Absolutely. Education is one fundamental tool for changing society in terms of dealing with poverty. The facilities that have been provided by Humanity First, generally speaking, especially in the education sector, have sort of contributed to eradicating poverty in the Gambia. I can speak for myself. I've benefited from the Humanity First Scholarship Project, and today I can say that I am a living example of the fact that I have moved out of poverty. I'm now teaching at the University of the Gambia, where essentially people are indirectly benefiting from what Humanity First has done in terms of education. Directly, Humanity First senior secondary schools graduate hundreds of students every year, and they enter the workforce of the Gambian economy, different sectors of the Gambian economy directly, and some of them make it to university and so on and so forth. So essentially, there are also other projects such as the IT Center, which provides skills. People from these centers and establish themselves and sort of face challenges of life head on. And so essentially speaking, I think the Knowledge for Life project is sort of a fitting response. It's a multi-method approach to dealing with educational issues, vocational training, and so on and so forth in the Gambia. Sort of a fitting response to meeting the social development goals, or if you like, the SDGs in the 21st century.
Thank you very much, Mr. Demba Kande, former head of Knowledge for Life for Humanity First in the Gambia, for joining us on 7 Africa. So what would you like to add on, if any, to what Mr. Kande has just said?
Demba was just talking about IT centres and things like that. So I remember hearing a story from the Gambia where there was someone from the rural villages came into the IT centre, said they were interested but couldn't afford it. So Humanity First sponsored them to do an IT course. So they came in very interested, very focused, did the course, went back. And then, a year or so passed, and they came back, greeted warmly at the IT centre in the Gambia. I said, so when we last met you, you were saying that you can't afford to feed your family. Now that you've done this education, can you now feed your family? It's like, you don't understand. Since I've done my certification, I've been able to go to a bank and get a job there. So it's not a case I can feed my family, I can now feed my village. So there's some really powerful stories coming out of Knowledge for Life and Learner School and the IT centres as well.
Mr. Akbar Iqbal, what would you say is the way forward in terms of enhancing solutions in the education, skills and knowledge landscape in Africa through your organization, Humanity First?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in terms of what Adam was referring to was our training centers. Now, just to reiterate, over these past decade or so, we've managed to help about 55,000 people through these training centers. And one of the most appreciative aspects that I saw, for example, when I was in Uganda, was that these training centers were not just located in populated areas, but they were in the remotest of areas where the illiteracy and the lack of education facilities were most high. So that was most appreciated in that respect. So going forward, the continuation of these projects, for example, for myself, in the Classroom Transformation Project, we now have a team of 10 volunteers that are about to head out and implement this project in countries now, for example, in Ghana, and French-speaking countries as well, such as Ivory Coast. So that continuation, that element of making sure that those needs of those local students are met, in the sense of making sure the resources that we provide them are in accordance to their curriculum, the posters that we design are addressing more further matters, for example, health and sanitation, are all aspects that Humanity First is currently endeavouring to do.
So basically, it's a case
of
basically it's a case of continuation, expansion. So we've got the projects, we've got the teams locally who. The local teams in the Gambia, Sierra Leone, Ghana, they're the real heroes of Humanity First. That's why we can do so much.
So how do you fund this whole big project?
So Humanity First is completely a charity. So everything that we do is based on the funds that are provided by donations. So that we do charity walks, so we get some donations from the Ahmadiyya community, but the majority of it is just personal donations.
Gentlemen, time is not on our side. We've noticed that the challenge in the gap of knowledge, skill, and education is huge. It is not a one-man task or a one organization task. Everybody needs to chip in and get on board. This is 7 Africa coming to you from the MTA International Studios in London. Thank you for joining.
We have love for Africa. There is hope in Africa. We are serving Africa. We are serving Africa. With all passion, we are serving Africa.